It seemed to me that there was a moment several years ago when your book came out, and God is Not Great, and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, there's four of you, made atheism acceptable, or at least made it a word that people could talk about.
Yes, and look, first of all, long may the illusion persist that I should be mentioned in the same breath as these great scientists and teachers and biologists and neuroscientists and so on, like Richard and Daniel Dennett and Lawrence Krauss and so many others, Steven Pinker, and people who've made real contributions to the sciences. I've done nothing of the sort. But yes, it is certainly true, there was a catalytic moment sometime in the beginning of this millennium where we were confronted at roughly the same time with a horrible resurgence of Islamic jihad, of Islam in its most crude form, conquest-minded, intolerant, fanatical, expansionist, and Messianic Jews hoping they could bring on the Messiah by stealing other people's land in Palestine, getting quite a lot of fanatical Christians to agree with them that that might indeed be an amusing way to bring on the apocalypse. A rogue state run by a criminal theocracy within measurable reach of a nuclear weapon. In other words, a thing we've all discussed since we were kids. What happens when a really bad guy gets sort of a really bad weapon? In other words, what happens when a millennial ideology acquires an apocalyptic arsenal? Well, we're about to find out. And that doesn't exhaust it. I mean, the very ominous developments in Russia, the reappearance of a xenophobic, chauvinistic, nationalist dictatorship with a police regime in Russia, with right at its side the black-cowled advisors of the Russian Orthodox Church who've become Putin's spiritual disguise and alibi. That, by the way, is something we should be keeping a very close eye on, wherever you look. And not to say, in the United States, people demanding that nonsense and pseudoscience be taught to children at taxpayers' expense. So, I could go on, believe me, but time to push back against this. And my guess was that there were many people ready to join such a pushback, and I think simultaneously, or contemporaneously anyway, some of us were thinking the same thing for the same reasons, yeah.
You wrote about a letter you got, or contribution, on one of the websites, and it said, "Who else feels Christopher Hitchens getting terminal throat cancer was God's revenge for him using his voice to blaspheme him? Atheists like to ignore facts. They like to act like everything is a coincidence. Really? It's just a coincidence that out of any part of his body, Christopher Hitchens got cancer and the one part of his body he used for blasphemy? Yea, keep believing that, atheists. He's going to writhe in agony and pain and wither away to nothing and then die a horrible, agonizing death. And then comes the real fun when he's sent to hellfire forever to be tortured and set afire."
Yes.
How do you debate somebody like that?
Well, I don't think there's any debating people like that, but I, and of course most Christians I know take a rather pitying view of that kind of unpleasantness. But I would still say that until very recently, and by very recent I mean a matter of decades, that was something like the official Christian view. You will reap as you've sown. God is not mocked. If you sin and if you don't repent, you will be punished now and in the hereafter. The guy is obviously not a super literate contributor, but he has the weight of most of the Christian centuries on his side. It's only very recently become possible to doubt things like eternal punishment, and by the Catholic Church it still isn't possible to doubt it. He's a bit too glib in saying that I get the cancer I deserve, because as I point out to him, I've blasphemed with many more organs than my throat. The cancer is actually in my esophagus, which is a narrow but deep distinction. And if everyone got the cancer they deserved, it would be observable, I think. I mean, Diego Rivera, great communist painter, got cancer in his penis, in fact died of it. But I don't think that was the main organ of his atheism, if you see what I mean. It can't always be that neat. Still, there are people who do think, if lightning hit me, they would shudder a bit. They'd think, gosh. They wouldn't be able to help themselves. They would not be able quite to think of that as an event in the natural order. And if Christians give up completely on believing that, or Muslims, or Jews, or any other believers, they know, of course, God doesn't act in that way, then they've given up a lot, because all the years in which they taught people that God does intervene in the natural world and does supervise it would be exposed as a fraud.